recognize that the impact of these technologies is not uniform across society. So, in this panel, we're going to reflect on how new technologies pose threats to human rights from a gender perspective, and we're going to highlight, hand in hand with our experts, the gender impacts of online risks that usually go unnoticed in the cybersecurity agenda. And that's why it was so important for us to have this panel today, to underline that nexus between cybersecurity and gender. So without further delay, we're going to have around 50 minutes per speaker to go into the substance of this panel. So I will, let's get started. I would like to invite Natalie first to take the mic and to guide us through this panel. Natalie is doctor in sociology from the University of Barcelona and a postdoctorate at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, specializing in the social impact of artificial intelligence. She's also visiting researcher at Stanford University and Columbia University. And currently she's a senior advisor consultant at UN Women and also advisory member at the Inter-American Development Bank on responsible artificial intelligence, gender diversity, and human rights. So thank you, Natalie, for joining us today. And I would like to invite you to let us understand with some practical examples how cyber incidents in the digital age can have gender impacts. Mm-hmm. If you have also some recommendations on which methodologies we can use to ensure that the cybersecurity systems are designed to be more resilient to gender threats, and how we can broaden our scope of the cybersecurity threat modeling to avoid gender biases. Mm-hmm. So with that, I'll stop and I'll pass you the mic. Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you to you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the OAS for the invitation and also the Bahamas government. I think it's very important to see this program and how you are taking into account all this perspective about gender and not just gender diversity. And it was a pleasure to listen to my colleagues, Jessica and Nina, sorry. So yes, just to talk a little bit about my work and how I think how I can answer your question about the risk and about the recommendation that I can have. So Isaac said we need to consider the impacts that we have in artificial intelligence and new technology, and this is the concept of social impact as the corporate social responsibility that we have in all the companies. We need to consider the ethical aspect, our responsibility with the population, the goal, the resources, many examples of things that we are working since many years ago in marketing, in how we develop the products, and so on. And when we are working about social impact, this means like the intended but the unintended positive and negative consequence that we have in the citizen, in the population. Which is the framework that we need to take, of course, the human rights, because this is a global and international agreement that we have and the framework that we need to consider when we are developing new technology and artificial intelligence, of course. And see the report that you publish regarding the gender violence with women and girls, when we are developing the technology, artificial intelligence, or we are working in cybersecurity, we need to pay attention regarding the rights that we can have consequent as today was mentioned, the right of freedom, the equity, the no discrimination, the integrity of the citizen. There are many rights that are vulnerable if we don't consider in our design, in our work, this framework. Of course, we have also the Sustainable Development Goals that are from the United Nations. And this goal represents our objective, where we want to be, and in the world that we want to design. So when we are working in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, we need to focus on how we have an impact in poverty, equity, the industry, and so on. No? Of course, the technology and artificial intelligence is positive in many sense. This is a different report that show the roles of artificial intelligence to achieve the sustainable development goals. But we need to consider that we also could have, like Jessica mentioned, like different negative impacts, or we can also mention, like she said, like remember, like vulnerabilities. No, so. If we check this paper, it mentioned that we have the green are the positive impact that we have in the sustainable development goals, but if we can check there are many risks regarding environment, equity, poverty, and so on. And this is only the reflect of the problem that we have in the society. We have discrimination in our society, we have problems about poverty, and could be maximized if we apply this technology with a bad sense. So we need to consider the individual, the technology, the government, and all these elements as a system, okay? So regarding gender perspective, so the technology is neutral, but the human, no, and our society are not neutral. So the AI can be sexist and racist. And this is a sample that I invite you to check the website of Gender Innovation from Stanford with the European Commission and the National Science Foundation. And there you can find a lot of examples in AI, as Nina explained, in the design of the cities, and how all the development of technology and product have a gender design. No? So this is a sample of the ImageNet is a data set that use a lot of pictures that came in majority from USA. That is represent the 4% of the global population. So if you search for a wedding dress, you will find that the majority are white. And in India, for example, the bride didn't use the white dress, so they describe like customs. So AI could be racist and also discriminate other culture, other type of tradition. But so when we consider the AI and new technology, we have 8 reasons, okay? How we to talk today, the hate speech, the disinformation, the surveillance state. There are many risks that we need to consider, but particularly when we focus on the gender perspective, women and underrepresented groups are more vulnerable because they are more risk to have cyberbullying, to have a privacy risk, also with social engineer. And of course, as Nina said right now, in the area of cybersecurity, women are less represented in the teams. So this is also a problem for in the senior position. They have less possibility to define a strategy because there are less women in the higher position. So we need to talk to work also in these teams and how we define the technology. Also with hate speech, not consensual surveillance, and there are many other examples of how we have a negative impact of technology for women and girls, of course. So another example, for example, I am participating in a project right now regarding human resources and how AI is applied in this area. And we check that there are many examples of doxing. That means that the women that publish offer to get a new job, they share also the contact to receive different offer. But also the problem is there are many people, and particularly men, that use this contact to share sex contacts in their phones and so on. So they are more vulnerable to receive this type of offensive problems with sharing the information. So when we are defining a platform, or we are designing a new app, we need to consider this risk. For example, in the bots that Microsoft defined, that is very well known, the AI. They try to reproduce and train the data with what the people say. And if you can check the comments that reproduce, it were very racist, sexist, and it was horrible because they didn't consider that this could happen. So we need to check, as today was an example of ChatGPT, we need to introduce also the ethical aspect when we are defining the technology, to restrict and to be awareness about all the problems that we could have with human rights and discrimination and so on. This is another example of the metaverse. When they defined the metaverse, they didn't consider that could happen sexual harassment or sexual problems. And one researcher that tried the metaverse experiment like sexual violence and sexual harassment using this platform. This was because nobody think about the possibility that it happened. So another type of problem that we could have with AI is that today was mentioned, the deep fake and the disinformation. Right now the AI, the generative AI, allow us to use this technology, for example, to undress women, okay? And this type of technology was used by men, particularly to undress familiar, celebrities, actresses, and this type of technology could have a negative impact for example, in the election, or with business, to public opinion. Imagine that if we use this type of technology with women that are is candidate to politics and country, and how we can use and have a negative impact in the image and of course in the election results. So these are examples of how we can have a negative impact in all these type of technology that are particularly affect women and girls. No? So, I'm sorry. It's not this sense. So also there are a negative impact with the deep fake that they are used in pornographic websites. Okay, because you can't show that this is true or not, and sometimes they introduce this image in pornographic website, and later what happened is very aggressive for the people, and could be disgusting for women, and also in many sense, of course. So regarding the social engineer, we have a lot of examples how the stereotype of women that are use voices to demand different data and to card numbers and to get bank account details. So in this case also we need to consider all the gender aspect in this type of phishing attacks. And not less important is, as we mentioned before, if we don't have women in senior position and in design of the technology, for example, in machine learning, there are only 12% of women that are designing this technology. So later in the voices of Siri, Alexa, Cortana that everyone use, you know that the majority of voices of women, okay? And the other aspect is nobody considered that what happened with the sexual comments that could happen. So if we can check this report that it was published by United Nations, we see that the results and the responses are not really accordance with the design. So what we can do, the first thing is when we start to define a product, a technology, and wherever that we are working, we need to start to think about which type of bias that we can have in our hypothesis, in our data, in the model, in the validation, and in development, okay? So as we say, we need to consider the problem, how we can include a more diverse perspective in research, in our project innovation, and how this data and algorithm could develop, address a gender, ethic, or, for example, also consider the age and the intersectionality in the design. No? Also, it's very important the inclusive language, the concept, and all the review that we have in our technology. The collecting of data, in many cases, the data is disaggregated by gender, age, and we need to consider that we have difference. So we need to disaggregate this data, and also the analysis need to pay attention in that. And of course, the dissemination and publication. I'm really happy that all the panel today consider the diversity regarding gender, culture, ethnicity, and this is very important because diversity is good for the innovation, to have another point of view, and to design a better technology and AI. So finally, my recommendations are that science benefit from diversity. We are we have more innovation if we have different point of view. There are many examples of articles that consider people that are very similar and people are diverse, and the group of people are diverse, have more idea, more innovative and better. No? So we need to take into account the scientific evidence, and as I mentioned before, this is the framework of the Gender Innovation Project of Stanford that say that we need to consider the numbers, it is the level of participation, we need to have more women and diverse and the represented group in our teams, but it's not enough because we can be women all in the same place, but if we later we don't have this disaggregated data, and if we don't consider this in our knowledge and in the innovation, it have done sense. So we need to consider the human rights, the social participation also, because it's very important to include the citizen and the point of view of the people that use this type of tools, no? And not just in the last point of the development of our technology. We need to introduce the population as consultant, involve there and collaborate, and also empower to develop this technology with us, okay? And this is this type of question that we can ask you if we have a potential impact in human rights, if which type of risk that we have. For example, the European Commission right now are working in AI Act, that is the framework of AI in Europe, and they consider this type of risk. No, if there is an acceptable risk, for example, have a vulnerable in human rights, for example, there are an example of China, they use the technology to give points to the people, and later, if you don't have a higher scope, later you can travel, for example. This type of AI or technology is an acceptable risk, so we can develop this type of technology, but if we have a technology with high risk in human rights, or that could be affect in negative sense women or LGBT in people that have disability, we need to consider that in all the process that we are developing. So we need to ask about how we can prevent this risk, also to check the law of the policy that we have, because these problems are not new. We have this problem in our society. We just need to check the regulation that we also have in our technology. And it's very useful, for example, in companies to have a gender equity plans and Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Commission, a group of experts that give us the opinion and try to supervise all the development of our technology. In Europe right now it's mandatory to have this type of gender equity plan, and I think in the future we will have this type of work in everywhere. So I recommend also to have protocols to prevent, for example, online violence, sexual harassment, and to think, for example, in metaverse, if they have maybe this commission, they could avoid to have this type of problem. So, and the last point is to have training and education, because it's very important to talk about that, and also to have training regarding ethic concept, so about human science aspects, that if we think about the people that are right now in technology, the majority engineer, in the programs, in the curriculum, they don't have this type of context. So right now, Harvard and Stanford are working to include this type of content in the programs. So it's very important to have also this education and training, not just a course that is an optional courses, to have a mandatory course in the program, on the professor. So the grading agency need to also, if they give money for a project, they need to ask about how they introduce this gender and diversity aspect in the design. And it's not just to say we have a lot of women in our team. It's to say we are designing a technology that represents the society, not just the half of population. So the reviewers also need to take into account that in the article and all the report that we are designing. And universities, of course, the academia have a lot of responsibility on how are training the future people in this area. And industry needs to incorporate this aspect regarding sex, gender in the market, to have more innovation, to have better services, and of course to give a global perspective of that in cybersecurity, for example, that is very important. So this is my recommendation regarding that, and I think it could be better.
Thank you very much, Natalie, because also you were in perfect time. So I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. And I think starting with this link between human right perspective, human-centered cybersecurity, and gender perspective, it was quite enriching for our panel. And obviously the different examples that you gave us help us to put on the ground something that sometimes might be difficult to grasp. So thank you very much for that. And now it's time to hear from Sam Andrews, our next speaker. And Sam is a lecturer, as I said, in criminology at the University of Lincoln. And she's researching right now in terrorism, extremism, public policy, and digital spaces. And we also ask Sam the same questions to help us here to reflect on. If you can also give us these specific examples of cyber incidents in the digital age that may have gender-based impacts, and also how can we ensure that cybersecurity systems are designed to be more resilient to gender-based threats, and obviously recommendations for the practitioners that are with us today. So the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you very much. As everyone said, thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to be here in the Bahamas. My research is looking into terrorism mostly. I'm a scholar who looks at terrorism and counterterrorism, particularly with an interest in gender and how gender is related to both terrorism and counterterrorism policies, and how this manifests on the internet as well. And the project I've been working on most recently is looking at video games and video game spaces, which in particular is a space which has not been paid much attention to for a long time, but recently has really come to the fore as a particular space that we should be paying attention to. Why that particularly is largely because video gaming is such a massive medium now. You might not all be aware of this, but video gaming is one of, if not the largest entertainment medium today. People who play video games around the world number around 2.81 billion, which is a massive demographic. Previously, when video games were first developed, this was a demographic which was mostly associated with young white males, and in particular young white males who were, shall we say, less socially inclined. There were people who were not well integrated into society, there were people who perhaps were bullied, and they saw video games as a way out of this. Today, though, the medium has really accelerated in encompassing itself into the lives of so many people. Probably many of you have on your smartphones today some form of game. And what this reflects is that the demographics have not only grown exponentially worldwide, but also have grown in terms of gender and age as well. We're no longer just looking at video gaming as being a pastime for young, white, socially inept men, but we're looking at video gaming being a pastime for women as well. Women are numbering around 40% of gamers today, and that number is increasing day on day. Indeed, we're also not just looking at this as a phenomena for young people, as the average age for people who play video games today is around 34 years old. As the technology moves as well, we're really seeing the gaming space being something which is developing as the technology allows it to. Really, this has been in relation to the growth of high-speed internet. Previously, video game companies, developers, publishers were really working in a physical market. They were creating video games consoles, they were creating physical copies of games, and people who played games together and wanted to socialize would have to do so offline, typically gathering together in a store for what's known as a LAN party, perhaps. Today, however, the growth of high-speed internet has meant that video gaming has moved from a product-based economy to a service-based economy. What this means is that most people buy their video games online, and these digital storefronts also provide means of communication for people who are interested in video games. Steam, being one of the biggest digital storefronts, the logo of which you can see at the top of this slide, is one of those places where you can not only buy video games, but also communicate with people with similar interests. They provide forums, and these communities that have grown from this particular interest are no longer communities which just talk about video games. They see this as, like any other kind of pastime, like football perhaps, as something which brings them together, but also allows them to discuss other interests. So in these video gaming spaces, in what we might call gaming-adjacent communities, you see people discussing not only video games, but also sports, culture, and increasingly things such as relationships and politics. Now, why is this of interest to us as security practitioners? Previously, video games were associated with violence, but that's largely been disproven. However, what we have seen since 2019 is a phenomena of terrorist actors using video games and video game cultures as a way of promoting the actions they're engaging in. The particular event that really has sparked interest and sparked concern about this is the 2019 Christchurch shootings. In this event, the shooter, Brenton Tarrant, used video game cultures as a way of marketing himself, not only to the world, but also to an audience that he thought would be receptive to his acts. So if you look at his manifesto, for instance, it has a number of points that he raises in relation to video game cultures. He mentions things that he thinks people who play video games will pick up on and be able to use this as a way into that particular culture, a way to further market himself to people who play video games. This event also has a number of copycats, which has really increased our concern about radicalization in video game spaces and the use of video game cultures by people who want to engage in things such as terrorism and violent extremism. From 2019, we've had similar events in Halle in Germany, in Poway, in El Paso, in Buffalo, where shooters have, again, used particular ideas, phrases, images from video game spaces in their manifestos and in their communications, and also increasingly have used ideas from video games within those particular acts as well. One of the interesting examples we can draw on is the shooter in Halle actually talked about having certain achievements associated with what he was doing. Almost as if he's saying that he's, completing particular acts according to rule sets that you might have in a video game. What we refer to this as in the academic space is the phenomenon of gamification. So quite a simple concept, and all this means basically is that people who are not involved in video games are nonetheless drawing ideas, phrases, concepts from video gaming spaces to make their actions not only seem more attractive, but also to draw people into those actions as well. People who engage in these kinds of acts typically are lone actors, typically are involved in right-wing extremism, and typically also are self-initiated. These particular acts and the associated ideas of radicalization in video gaming spaces has really, really drawn in interest from counterterrorism practitioners as well. And we're seeing increasing interest from actors in the EU, the UN, the FBI, and various other policing and counterterrorism agencies who are seeing this as a particular problem. Technologically, these kind of acts really can't exist, not only without the modern technology that we take advantage of today, but also, of course, without the video games themselves. At the heart of this is, of course, the fact that video games themselves are technology. But more importantly, what we're looking at are the associated other technologies which these actors use to propagate their ideas and to carry out their acts and to market those acts. Typically what you find in these cases are that the shooters wear cameras on their helmets or on their heads. They use live streaming technologies to instantly upload footage of their actions to the internet. They use essentially website infrastructure, and they need website infrastructure to be able to have these kinds of activities made available. And of course, more importantly, and what we're going to discuss more today, is that they need an audience who is receptive. One of the major differences between actors who engage in these kind of behaviors, actors who are lone actors carrying out terrorist attacks, and traditional terrorist groups, is indeed that they are alone. And this is important in this sense because if you are involved in a more traditional terrorist organization, after you've carried out your act, you can have confidence that that organization is going to spread propaganda for you, is going to try and defend you in some way in the public realm, is going to ensure that the efforts you put in to carry out that act are matched with the kind of escalation of actions as well as audience reception of your message. However, if you're working alone, what you need to do is to ensure that your actions are well communicated to people in a manner that it will be instantly made available. In other words, it can't be suppressed later by governments. It enters the web almost immediately and therefore is very, very difficult to take down. So also what is advantageous to people who are carrying out these acts is that they need that receptive audience. And therefore, one of the theoretical reasons as to why lone actors might cloak their activities in this kind of language of video games and use kind of cultural shibboleths to ensure that audiences are picking up on their message is because they think that those particular communities are inherently going to be receptive to those messages as well. So they're creating messages that are targeted and they believe are going to be picked up by these communities too. This is particularly concerning for us who work in the counterterrorism field and indeed who are going to be working in the cybersecurity field because the data is saying that year on year, instances like this are increasing. This data is from the START database, and this particular graph is only covering the United States, but the data is pretty typical of countries all around the world. The only exceptions to this rule are countries who are perhaps engaged in warfare or active civil conflicts, who are more likely to have traditional terrorist groups which are active. But those countries which are not engaged in civil conflicts, which are not engaged in warfare, are year on year seeing that lone actor terrorists are the major actors involved in terrorist activities. And indeed, it is the right-wing, ideological right-wing terrorist actors which are also fastest growing. Also concerning is the fact that year on year, people are moving from an unradicalized space to a radicalized space much, much more quickly. Year on year, we are seeing more people who were not on the radar of the security services coming onto the radar of the security services and very, very quickly becoming radicalized. We're seeing people becoming radicalized in 1 year increasingly. And interestingly as well, a lot of this radicalization is driven by social media. This makes this particularly important for these cases because, as I've just mentioned, those actors who are engaging in these kinds of attacks are using existing internet communities and using existing social media platforms to propagate their ideas. So if we think about how these communities are receiving this message, this is largely where we come to a more gendered analysis of what is going on. Because the belief in those persons who are engaging in these activities is that these communities are going to be receptive to this message. And the idea is that these communities are receptive because there are certain members of these communities who really lean in to that previous idea of what it is to be a video gamer. Young, male, isolated, white. Therefore, those persons who believe in that idea are persons who are more likely to engage with that kind of message. And indeed, if they engage in those kinds of messages, they're more likely to boost the activities of terrorist actors as well. Now, indeed, this is mostly men. And if you look at the data, it is almost exclusively men who are engaging in these activities and also who are boosting these activities. And one reason for this is because there are sectors of the video gaming community who are very, very hostile to women and who are very, very hostile to feminist politics. We can point to a particular event in 2014 known as Gamergate, where young men from gaming communities found it abhorrent that women were entering these spaces, that women were demanding better representation, demanding that they would no longer be harassed, no longer sexualized. And the reaction in those particular spaces was that they would engage in further harassment, they would engage in further trolling, they would try and drive those women out. And what resulted from that is that far-right actors also saw this as a particular point where they could enter those communities. They saw that as a way in to further radicalize those communities. Now, those communities who celebrate those particular terrorist acts, those acts which communicate as acts which are engaged in the video game communities, are also very, very unlikely to be celebrating women's acts. One of the ways that you see these communities reacting to so-called gamified attacks is that they then turn it into a kind of ongoing game. They measure the kill counts of terrorist actors and create scoreboards, for instance. And they use this as a way to create a kind of ongoing narrative, linking different attacks together. Now, one of the reasons that these kind of attacks remain largely male is because those persons who are going to be at the top of those scoreboards, the persons who are going to be most celebrated, are very, very likely to be male as well. Women are very unlikely to be violent terrorist offenders. They're much more likely to be supporting terrorism than they are to be carrying out violent acts. So in the first instance, they're very unlikely to reach the top of that scoreboard. Secondly, as well, because we're talking about a phenomena where terrorist actors are trying to communicate with a certain audience to organically boost their activities, because that audience is hostile to women, there's really no reason why a woman would look to that community if she was going to carry out a violent act as a community which is going to boost her act. So therefore it creates a kind of cyclical way of behaving because there's no reason for women to engage in those activities. Further as well, there are a lot of intersections between misogynistic extremism and this kind of violent terrorist activity. As I mentioned before, those elements of the video gaming community which are misogynistic have linked up with far-right actors, which see these kind of ideologies as ways into that community. And indeed, what you see most of the time is what we call networked misogyny. Those persons who are misogynistic reaching out and celebrating the misogyny of others and using this as a kind of way in, a gateway to link together ideologies and to link together actors. There have been a number of studies that I've done that I'd be happy to talk about with any of you after this, which have really shown that if you look at the networks online that exist, you will see that when people who play video games begin to engage in misogyny, they then begin to link up with other extremist actors as well. And essentially what this leads to is that kind of self-reinforcing behavior that leads to male supremacism. So overall, what we're seeing is, on the one hand, terrorist actors seeing video game communities as a way in, particularly lone actors who need those kind of audiences to boost the activities that they're engaging in, seeing this as something which they can draw from. But also, on the other hand, we're seeing elements of the video gaming community who are very misogynistic, using that as a way of linking up different ideologies as well, and creating links between far actors and the video gaming community. One of the biggest problems that